There's a pattern here, and once you see it, it's hard to unsee. A healthy society begins with thinking. Not perfect thinking, but enough independent thought to keep people honest with themselves. Enough questioning to keep power from becoming lazy. Enough curiosity to keep fear from becoming the main operating system. But over time, thinking can get slower because life gets louder. Complexity grows. People get tired. Institutions become more invested in control than in truth. In that climate, preaching becomes attractive because it is efficient. It offers certainty quickly. It gives people a story to live inside. It removes the burden of wrestling with hard questions and replaces it with a tribe and a script. Little by little, a culture begins to trade thinkers for believers. Not necessarily believers in God, but believers in narratives, believers in slogans, believers in our side and their side, believers in talking points repeated so often they begin to feel like evidence. At that point, the argument is no longer about what is true. It becomes about who is loyal. If you want to see what that looks like, look at Congress. It increasingly feels less like a body of lawmakers reasoning through complex problems and more like rival camps trying to win a moral contest. The goal becomes performance. The camera becomes the audience that matters more than the country. The speech becomes the product, and the problem becomes background scenery. And in that environment, nuance becomes betrayal. Not because people suddenly stopped understanding complexity, but because complexity becomes dangerous. The moment you admit a problem has multiple causes, or that the other side might have a partial point, you are no longer seen as thoughtful. You are seen as disloyal. So people learn to speak in tighter sentences. They learn to avoid honest admissions. They learn to perform in a certain way because certainty is rewarded and careful thinking is punished. And once that becomes the culture, compromise begins to look like weakness. Not because compromise is always noble, but because compromise requires something preaching cannot tolerate, the ability to say, I might be wrong, or I do not have the full picture yet. That is where honest questions start to die. Not because people don't have them, but because people learn what it costs to ask them. When a society loses its ability to ask honest questions out loud, it loses one of its main ways to correct itself. In the next episode, we'll look at what happens when the same drift shows up in education and how that turns a temporary crisis into a generational one.